This is the inaugural Global Read-A-THON for the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, coming to you from Georgia State University in Atlanta. Here is former CNN anchor and White House correspondent, Suzanne Malveaux.
Tell me about that conversation.
Well, I was driving my car, I was minding my business, and it was a block call, and I said, hello, and she says, hey girl, this is Oprah.
No.
And
she said, hey girl,
and
this
I
is
said,
Oprah.
ma'am? And she said that she had read the book, it wasn't out yet, and I was very excited, and I was also very intimidated because, if you look at the book, Oprah's name is literally on my book. But then you know what I thought about? I thought about all the times in my life when people have given me their good names in other ways. Like when I wanted to go to university, my teacher wrote a letter and she signed her good name. And when she put her name on my application, I felt supported, not intimidated. And I tapped into that to feel supported by these kind of big name people who weighed in and said kind things on my book. So instead of letting it frighten me, I let it empower me.
And who do you empower today? Who are the young writers, the aspiring writers that you put your good name to?
Well, you know what? I guess I think about my students, and the first thing I tell them is, you are not an aspiring writer. You're an unpublished writer. But if you are writing, if you are doing the work, if you are honoring your practice, you are a writer. You're just not discovered yet.
Give me one of your favorite books, besides perhaps your own.
Well, my favorite book in the world would be Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison.
Yes.
That is my absolute favorite book. But I also think back on the books that I loved so much when I was a child, because you will never love a book the way you loved the book when you were a child. Because when you're a child, first, a book is a miracle. There's an entire world of people living in there. And so I remember when I was a child, I must have read Charlotte's Web 20 times.
Yeah, Charlotte's Web was a great book.
It was so good.
Yeah.
A courageous spider.
The courageous, that's right. And tell us, this is a global event. What do you hope people take away from today?
I hope that books remind us that we are more alike than we are different. And books are so interesting because when you read a book, it's so private. You are alone with your thoughts. No one is judging you or weighing in on your reactions. But then when we talk about books with other people, it's like you can be in the same room with someone a world away if we're reading the same thing, and makes us ask questions. And that's what I hope happens as a result of this read-a-thon, that each one of us discovers a book by someone who's on the other side of the world, and we realize that the oceans between us are oceans, but they also are crossable just by reading a book.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. We're going to hear you read your own book just moments away. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Such an honor. Well, she's going to make her way to the Reading Corner. We want to go back to the performance that we enjoyed earlier. I want to share it with you again. It is a Kora performance from the Gambia Hour. Please enjoy.
Tamba is a traditional ruler in Badibu. We call it Ilyasa. And then Mama Tamba died in 107 years ago. He stayed about 36 years ago he died. He spent 170 years alive ruling. So I'm happy to play this song for you guys here to remind us about the history of Mama Tamba, what he does for his people in Badibu. Thank you. Mama Tamba Barigo Jilanga. Mama Tamba Barigo Jilanga. Mama Tamba Mazoya Begambia. Munajata Sela Wanimbira Wude Tamba. Mama Tamba Mazoya Begambia. Africa, alinga wuli sinola, ngana adolu no, ngana adolu bunya, ngana adolu horma. Vende banko yirwandi la fala ado. Banko man pensora si me yidan di meta bidela ado la. Molde bunyo no la fenga me mangela ado ke. Dame kodali ngam bodula lu lonjani bentarula lu kurosila moba jama de Gambia moba jama lu yela wole do ku jama de Gambia kono abolu kono kuntakinde dunia fere fiule ka judala londola asijida la balola bare fiya mu baladi mu fiya mu sente baladi ala ngana judum fanda mu me ngaka fam fama ala ye mu sole ama mu ka nyandi jo ngana baga jombe madeni dalunga mama damba bariwa jilanga mama damba bariwa jilanga. Thank you.
Time now for An American Marriage, a novel about a black couple who embody the American dream, written by Tayari Jones, who we have the honor of reading to us this afternoon. The novel tells us the story of an African-American couple whose lives are turned upside down when the husband is accused of a rape he did not commit. Part of Oprah's 2018 book club selection, the book received rave reviews, including one from former President Barack Obama, who said, quote, "An American Marriage is, quote, a moving portrayal of the effects of a wrongful conviction on a young African-American couple," close quote. So without further delay, here's author Tayari Jones reading excerpts from her best-selling book, An American Marriage. Tayari.
This is going to work out, I promised him. You didn't do it. I'm looking at so much time, he said. I can't ask you to throw your life away for me. His words and his eyes were speaking two different languages, like someone saying no while shaking his head yes. No one's going to throw anything away, I said. I had faith in those days. I believed in things. But what I know now is this. They didn't believe me. 12 people and not one of them took me at my word. There in the front of the room, I explained that Roy couldn't have raped the woman in room 206 because we had been together. I told them about the magic fingers that wouldn't work, about the movie that played on the snowy television. The prosecutor asked me what we had been fighting about. Rattled, I looked to Roy and to both our mothers. Banks objected, so I didn't have to answer, but the pause made it appear that I was concealing something rotten at the pit of our very young marriage. Even before I stepped down from the witness stand, I knew that I had failed him. Maybe I wasn't appealing enough, not dramatic enough, too, not from around here. Who knows? Uncle Banks, coaching me, had said, now is not the time to be articulate. Now is the time to give it up. No filter, all heart. No matter what you're asked, what you want the jury to see is why you married him. I tried, but I didn't know how to be anything other than well-spoken in front of strangers. I wish I could have brought a selection of my art, the Man Moving series, all images of Roy. I would say, this is who he is to me. Isn't he beautiful? Isn't he gentle? But all I had were words which are light and flimsy as air. As I took my seat, not even the black lady juror would look at me. It turns out that I watched too much television. I was expecting a scientist to come and testify about DNA. I was looking for a pair of good-looking detectives to burst into the courtroom at the last minute, whispering something urgent. Everyone would see that this was a big mistake, a major misunderstanding. We would all be shaken but appeased. I fully believed that I would leave the courtroom with my husband beside me. Secure in our home, we would tell people how no black man was really safe in America. But 12 years is what they gave him. Roy understood that 12 years was an eternity because he sobbed right there at the defendant's table. His knees gave way and he fell into his chair. The judge paused and demanded that Roy bear this news on his feet. He stood again and cried, not like a baby, but in a way that only a grown man can cry, from the bottom of his feet up through his torso and finally through his lips. When a man wails like that, you know it's all the tears he was never allowed to shed. As Roy howled, my fingers kept worrying a rough patch of skin beneath my chin, a souvenir of scar tissue. When they did what I remember as kicking in the door, what everyone else remembers as opening it with the key, after that door was open, however it was open, we were both pulled from the bed. They dragged Roy into the parking lot, and I followed, lunching for him, wearing nothing but a white slip. Someone pushed me to the ground, and my chin hit the pavement. The slip rolled up, showing everything to everyone, and my tooth sank into the soft skin of my bottom lip. Roy was on the asphalt beside me, barely beyond my grasp, speaking words that didn't reach my ears. I don't know how long we lay there, parallel like burial plots. Husband, wife, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder.
Thank you so much, Tayari Jones. We really appreciate that. That is just such a powerful, powerful novel, and so many people who have really related to that in some ways. So thank you. Now we go on to a reading from an icon, multi-award-winning author, Edwidge Dandika. We are so honored to have her to join us today in the program. She is the author of several books, including Breath, Eyes, Memory, part of Oprah's book club selection. The Haitian-American author focuses her work on the lives of women and their relationships. She also touches on issues of poverty, injustices, and power. Today, she is reading from one of her best-selling novels, Crick Crack. Here she is.
My name is Edwidge Dandika. I'm the author of, among other books, Crick Crack. I'll be reading to you from Crick Crack, from the epilogue, which is called Women Like Us. The title of this piece comes from, was inspired by a poem by the extraordinary poet Lorna Goodison, in which there's a line that just always trailed me and that I always wanted to put in a story. When shadows like dust falls, women like us will rise. So, women like us. You remember thinking while braiding your hair that you look a lot like your mother. Your mother who looked like your grandmother and her grandmother before her. Your mother had 2 rules for living. Always use your 10 fingers, your 10 doigts, which meant that you should be the best cook and housekeeper who ever lived. Your mother's second rule went along with the first. Never have sex before marriage. And even after you marry, you shouldn't say you enjoy it or your husband won't respect you. And writing was as forbidden as dark rouge on the cheeks or first kiss before 18. It was an act of indolence, something to be done in a corner when you could have been learning to cook. Are there women who both cook and write? Kitchen poets, they call them. They slip phrases into their stew and wrap meaning around their pork before frying it. What will she do? What will be her passion? Your aunts would ask when they came over to cook on great holidays, which called for cannon salute back home, but meant absolutely nothing here. Her passion is being quiet, your mother would say, but then she's not being quiet. You always hear the scraping from her, creak, crack, pencil, paper. It sounds like someone crying. Someone was crying, you and the writing demons in your head. You have nobody, nothing but this piece of paper, they told you. Only a notebook made out of discarded fish wrappers, pantyhose cardboard. These were the best confidence for a lonely little girl. When you write, it's like braiding your hair, taking a handful of coarse, unruly strands and attempting to bring them unity. Your fingers have still not perfected the task. Some of the braids are long, some are short, others are thick, others are thin, some are heavy, some are light, like the diverse women in your family. Those whose fables and metaphors, whose similes and soliloquies, whose diction and je ne sais quoi daily slip into your survival soup by way of their fingers. You have always had your 10 fingers. They curse you each time you force them around the contours of a pen. Yes, women like you do write. They carve onion sculptures and potato statues. They sit in dark corners and braid their hair into new shapes and twists. in order to control the stiffness, the unruliness, the rebelliousness that cannot be tamed. You remember thinking while braiding your hair that you look a lot like your mother. You remember her silence when you laid your first notebook in front of her, her disappointment when you told her that words would be your life's work, like the kitchen had always been hers. She was angry at you for not understanding. Ça, son métier. You remember thinking while braiding your hair that you look a lot like your mother and her mother before her. It was their whispers that pushed you, their murmurs over pots sizzling in your head, 1,000 women urging you to speak through the blunt tip of your pencil. Kitchen poets, like Paul Marshall wrote, kitchen poets, you too called them. Ghosts, like burnished branches on a flame tree. These women that asked for your voice so that you could tell your mother that yes, women like you do speak, even if they speak in tongues that are hard to understand. When you were a little girl, you used to dream that you were lying among the dead and all the spirits were begging you to scream. And even now, you're still afraid to dream because you know that you will never be able to do what they say as they say it, the old spirits that live in your blood. Most of the women in your life had their heads down. They would wake up one morning and find everything gone. It isn't shame, however, that kept their heads down. They were singing, searching for meaning in the dust. And sometimes they were talking to faces across the ages, faces like yours and mine. You thought that if you didn't tell the stories, the sky would fall on your head. You often thought that without the trees, the sky would fall on your head. You learned in school that you have pencils and paper only because the trees gave themselves in sacrifice. There have been days when the sky was as close to your hair to falling on your head. This fragile sky has terrified you your whole life. Silence terrifies you more than the pounding of 1,000,000 pieces of steel chopping away at flesh. Sometimes you dream of only hearing the beating of your own heart, but this has never been the case. You have never been able to escape the pounding of other hearts that had outlived yours by millions of years. And over time, when you have needed us, you have always cried, creak, and we have answered, crack, and it has shown us that you have not forgotten us. You remember thinking while braiding your hair that you look a lot like your mother who looked like your grandmother and her grandmother before her. Your mother, she introduced you to the first echoes of the song, the first echoes of the tongue that you now speak, when at the end of the day she would braid your hair Sunday pretty as you sat between her legs scrubbing the kitchen pots. While your fingers worked away at the last shadows of her day's work, she would make your braids Sunday pretty, even during the week. When she was done, she would ask you to name each braid after those 999 women who were still boiling in your blood. And since you had written them down and memorized them, their names would just come rolling off your tongue. And this and everything else you have ever done has been your testament to the way that these women lived and died and lived again. Thank you so much for allowing me to read to you and share this piece from Cric Crac. Cric Crac for us is a very important and powerful element of our storytelling tradition. When the storyteller says cric, and then the listener, the person taking in the story, says crack. And another way that we greet storytellers and others alike is by saying on est, where the greeter says on est and the person being greeted says respect. So I greet you with on est, which is honor, and also respect. And I thank you for sharing this moment with me. And it was an honor to be here. Please keep reading. That is our own personal resistance. Thank you.
Welcome back. We now have a reading from an excerpt from Professor Akinyele Umoja's book, We Will Shoot Back. It's a nonfiction book based on the armed resistance in the Mississippi Freedom Movement. Here's a bit for you.
One of the most dynamic examples of armed resistance took place August of 1964 in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, where the Emmett Till murder had taken place. Margaret Block was assigned to organize in Tallahatchie in January of 1964. After joining SNCC in 1963, she began to make contacts in Tallahatchie County in the early months of 1964. Block was the only COFO staff person appointed to Tallahatchie on the eve of Freedom Summer. COFO is a coalition of groups fighting for voting rights. No blacks were registered to vote in Tallahatchie, which was considered a dangerous county. In June of '64, Block was forced to flee Tallahatchie due to white supremacist harassment. She returned weeks later, hosted by 89-year-old Janie Brewer in the unincorporated Swan Lake community in the rural southwestern section of Tallahatchie. Mrs. Brewer was a matriarch of a family, landowning family, a farming family who solidly supported the voter registration effort. Several of Brewer's children and grandchildren lived on the family land. The Brewer family became the core of Block support in Tallahatchie. Stokely Carmichael sent reinforcements in July 1964. After the groundwork was established by Block and the Brewers, and other rural residents demonstrated the capacity to support a project in the county. Carmichael appointed his Howard University classmate, Fred Mangrum, to head the project. Mangrum was accompanied by Ed Brown, Tina Lawrence, Gwen Gilliam, and Lynn Edwards, the son of California Congressman Don Edwards, all of whom resided at the Brewer Farm. On August 5th, 1964, 4 of Brewer's sons and one other local black resident unsuccessfully attempted to register at the Tallahatchie County Courthouse. 3 days later, Lynn Edwards sent a report to the COFO headquarters in the SNCC National Office. SNCC is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Atlanta, stating, quote, "Their lives are in great danger," end of quote. Edwards continued, declaring that one of the Brewer sons, Eugene, had experienced whites, quote, "coming by his house with guns every day since he tried to register," end of quote. The Brewer family and the COFO staff and volunteers persisted in their efforts to be registered in spite of the terrorism and harassment. On August 11th, a small contingent of volunteers caravanned to the county courthouse to attempt to register. They were met near the courthouse by a mob of over 90 whites with multiple trucks with a considerable number of guns. A portion of the mob attempted to attack the small delegation of local blacks and civil rights activists. A Department of Justice official on the scene had to intervene to prevent a member of the mob from striking Margaret Block with a blade. The activists and local blacks noticed that their caravan of two vehicles was being pursued by 3 truckloads of whites as they headed back to Swan Lake and the Brewer Farm. Sheriff E.R. Dugan was among the whites following them. The Brewers and their neighbors came up with a plan for protection of the COFO activists and the local blacks in the procession back to Swan Lake. Jesse Brewer radioed back to the farm. As their group approached a turn in the road before the Brewer Farm, a surprise was waiting for their white supremacist pursuers. Margaret Block described the situation. "We lived in the country, so we had to go way back to the country. It was 2 cars. The white people, they were following us. They thought that they were going to ambush us. Little did they know we had a whole caravan of cars around the bend waiting for us to come back. All those farmers and everybody, carpool of people with guns, about 10 cars. When they saw those people, they turned around and went back to town. Mrs. Brewer realized the attacks would not end so easily. She initiated a plan to ambush the night riders who would inevitably come in the evening. The Brewer matriarch instructed her children and grandchildren, guests, to conceal themselves with firearms in the cotton fields and shrubbery near the farm that evening. Margaret Block and Tina Lawrence assisted Mrs. Brewer inside the kitchen preparing gasoline bombs, Molotov cocktails in anticipation of white supremacist attackers coming that evening. Block remembered the night we were making those Molotov cocktails. We had a lot of bottles, and Mrs. Brewer was in the kitchen trying to pour gas in the bottles and was spilling gas all everywhere. And I'm like, damn, if we get burned up in here, everyone's going to swear the Klan did it. It's going to be Mrs. Brewer blowing us up. That's the end of her quote. Sheriff Dugan returned that evening with a truckload of local whites. Dugan and his associates did not notice members of the Brewer family, Mangrum and Brown, concealed near and around the farm with rifles and shotguns, according to Block. By the time we let them get not halfway to the house, somebody got up and shined a great big old floodlight on them and shot up in the air. We were going to let them get close to the house, so we were going to set them on fire. When we shot up in the air, they got out of there. End of quote. Mrs. Brewer came out of the house ready to hurl a Molotov cocktail at the night riders. Night riders never returned to the Brewer farm again after the evening of August 11, 1964. That's the excerpt, my favorite story from the book, We Will Shoot Back, Armed Resistance in the Mississippi Freedom Movement, published by New York University Press, 2018.
We, of course, thank Professor Umoja. Now, we want to share another performance from the Margaret Garner opera that we showed you earlier. You remember the renowned author Toni Morrison. She actually wrote the words to it. It is one of the few operas written by an African American. Here's a bit of a sample. Okay, so what is a read-a-thon without the next generation of bright minds? I'm honored here to have a student from the Colombo Academic and Cultural Institute. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your being here. Tell us your name and your grade.
My name is Chikwelu Ikemefula Odimbe. I'm in the 8th grade.
In the 8th grade.
Yes.
And you and I were chatting before, and you said you do a lot of activities. But part of what you do is you do read. What's your
Reading.
favorite kind of book?
My favorite kind of book is like genre.
Sure.
Genre.
Yeah, genre. I like
Adventure
that word.
books. Like exploring, learning different things, stuff like that. Yeah.
Environment, superheroes, what kind?
Superheroes, I'd say.
Superheroes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is around the world, right? People are picking up books and they're reading. What would you say to some kids who are outside of their country, other students, about, I don't know, the importance of having a book or even reading?
Try to read while you can, I guess. There's different people around the world that don't get to read, I guess. So, yeah, just read. Try
Just
to read.
Yeah, you know that some kids don't even have access to like the
Yeah.
amazing libraries that we
Yeah,
have. And
especially.
your group is such a talented group. I mean,
Thank you.
You do so much. I'm looking forward to seeing more of you.
Thank you.
Okay, tell us about your book. What's the name of the book here?
This is Akata Witch. It's by Nettie Okorafor. And
Okay.
yeah.
Can you read some of that for us? I'd love to
Okay.
hear what this
Chapter
book is
1.
about.
Chapter 1, The Candle. I've always been fascinated by candles. Looking into the flame calms me down. Here in Nigeria, PHC is always talking the lights. So I keep candles in my room just in case. PHC stands for Power Holding Company of Nigeria, but people like to say it really stands for Please Hold Candles in Nigeria. Back in Chicago, we had National Grid, and the electricity was always working. Not here. Though, not yet. Maybe in the future. One night after the power went out, I lit candle as usual. Then also as usual, I got down on the floor and just gazed at the flame. My candle was white and thick, like the ones in the church. I lay down on my belly and just stared and stared into it. So orange like the abdomen of a firefly. It was nice and soothing until it started flickering. Then I thought I saw something serious and big and scary. I moved closer. The candle just flickered like any other flame. I moved even closer. Until the flame was an inch from my eyes, I could see something. I moved closer still. I was almost there. I was just starting to understand what I saw when the flame kissed something above my head. Then the smell hit me. The room was suddenly bright yellow-orange. My hair was on fire. I screamed and smacked my head as hard as I could. My burning hair singed my hand. Next thing I knew, my mother was there. She tore off her rapa and threw it over my head. The electricity suddenly came back on. My brothers ran in, then my father. The room smelled awful. My hair was half gone and my hands were tender. That night, my mother cut my hair. 70% of my lovely long hair was gone. But it was I saw that candle stayed with me the most. I'd seen the end of the world in its flames, raging fires, boiling oceans, toppled skyscrapers, ruptured land, dead and dying people. It was horrible, and it was coming. My name is Sunday Nwaze, and I confuse people. I have 2 other brothers, like my parents. My brothers were both born in Nigeria. Then my family moved to America, where I was born in the city of New York. When I was 9, I returned to Nigeria near the town of Aba. My parents felt it would be a better place to raise my brothers and me. At least what my mom says. We were Igbo. That's an ethnic group from Nigeria. So I'm American and Igbo, I guess. You see why I confuse people? I'm Nigerian. My blood American by birth. And Nigerian again because I live here. I have West African features like my mother, but while the rest of my family is dark brown. I have light yellow hair, skin color of sour milk, and hazel eyes that look like God ran out the right color. I'm albino. Being albino made the sun my enemy. My skin burned so easily that I felt nearly flammable. That's why, though I was really good at soccer, I couldn't join the boys' team when they played after school, although they wouldn't have let me anyway. Me being a girl, very narrow-minded, I had to play at night with my brothers when they felt like it. Of course, this was all before the afternoon with Chi-Chi and Orlu. When everything changed, I look back now and see there signs of what was to come. When I was 2, during a brief visit to Nigeria with my family, I contained malaria. It was so bad that I almost died from it when I got back home to the States. I remember my brothers used to tell me I was a freak because I would remember so far back. I was really hot, absolutely burning up with my fever. My mother stood over my bed, crying. I don't remember my father being there much. My brother would come in once a while and pat my forehead or kiss my cheeks. I was like that for days. Then a light came to me, like tiny yellow flame or sun. It was laughing and warm, but nice, kind, warm, like bathwater that has been sitting for a few minutes. Maybe this is why I like candles so much. It floated just above me for a long time. I think it was watching over me. Sometimes mosquitoes fly into it and get vaporized. It must have decided that I wasn't going to die, because eventually it went away and I got better. So it's not as if strange things haven't happened for me before. I knew I looked like a ghost, all pale-skinned, and I was good at being ghost quiet. When I was younger, if my father was in the main room drinking his beer and reading his paper, I'd sneak in. I could move like a mosquito when I wanted. Not the American ones that buzz in the ear, the Nigerian ones that are silent like the dead.
Thank you so much. You are a beautiful, beautiful reader.
Thank
What do you
you.
think? What do you make of that book? I mean, that was a lot in that passage,
Yeah.
boy. I tell you.
What I think, the book is just, well, the first parts that I was reading, I was getting the idea that she was not fitting in because she's albino and she couldn't do things as much. And she feels like she doesn't fit in with the kids that she was in when she was in America. But she also doesn't feel like she fits in with the kids when she's in Nigeria because she's albino, so she can't really relate. So
Yeah, so many young people, I think, maybe can relate to that feeling.
yes,
Sometimes, from time to adults too.
yeah,
Okay, thank you so much. I really
welcome.
appreciate it. That was really great.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, now, the performance we've all been waiting for. Students from the Colombo Academic and Cultural Institute in Decatur, Georgia. They are here to celebrate with us. They're going to be performing an African-inspired dance routine for us right here in the studio. So I want you to turn up your volume, sit close to the screen. You're not going to want to miss a step of this dance. So without further delay, here are the students from the Colombo Academic and Cultural Institute. Take it away. much. That was so beautiful, inspiring. We really appreciate you. And of course, we'll have you back to conclude the program. I also want to tell you a little bit about a book that I'm currently reading. This is from the late Elijah Cummings. He was one of the representatives in Maryland. He was a colleague and a friend. This is the book. It's called We Are Better Than This. Just a little bit, a passage from this book, very, very special to me. This was a time when we could tell that he was ill and he was still doing his job until the very, very end. He was such an inspiring man. He said, I'd been feeling bad, very bad, tired and worn down. Against my doctor's urging and my wife's, I hadn't let up. We had a job to do, hearings to hold, truth to find. I worked early, I worked late, I drafted and reviewed legislation, I returned emails in the middle of the night, I conferred with colleagues at all hours. Finally, after weeks of pushing too hard, in late July, I nearly collapsed. My wife took my temperature, it was 102, and she called the doctor. He sent me right to the hospital where I was told I had pneumonia. He said, Elijah, you better take care of yourself now if you have any hope of doing your job in the future. I was still in the hospital bed at Johns Hopkins the morning of my speech, on IV fluids and meds, barely able to move. My wife asked me what I was going to do, but I think she knew. I'm going to give that speech if I have to crawl, I said. I did not crawl, but I didn't run either. I managed to convince the medical team to give me a 4-hour pass, which is just what it sounds like. Highly restricted, controlled conditions with time limitations that I could not break. I was allowed to go to Washington with medical care nearby, then give my speech, do a Q&A, and get back to the hospital in 4 hours. Not a minute longer. My car arrived at the press club. I was wheeled into the room, assisted to my seat on the dais. When my time to speak came up, I had to be helped to my feet, and a stool was placed near the podium just in case I had to sit. After that, I didn't need any more help. I had already gone through the ritual I follow before every speech. I rehearse with God. I look out at the audience. I soak them in. I get a feel for the space, the place and time, the moment. I was ready. That speech, that day, was my destiny. I had always treated every speech as if it were my last. Today, that was more true than any before. I stood quietly and looked out at the faces. I waited, I breathed, and then I spoke. God has called me to this moment. I did not ask for it. I had been brought there by my pain in body and spirit, which had fueled my passion, my mission, and no question about it, I had a purpose. Yes, I had a true purpose that day. I had summoned my strength for a reason. I was there to deliver a message to the messengers, the media, to carry back to the readers and listeners and followers and bloggers and posters. I wanted them to hear the hue and cry of our people against the injustices, the cruelty, the divisiveness that were all fast becoming commonplace, almost normal. I wanted the messengers to hear the message and shout it out to everyone and say, no, we will not let this happen. No, we're better than this. We're so much better than this. Fast forward. But we, the people, and the free press can do something about it. We are not powerless. I reminded the messengers of their duty to report and inform over and over, relentlessly. Right now, more than ever, I invoked Martin Luther King's words, our silence becomes our betrayal. I told them not to be silent. I told them to speak up. We're better than this, Elijah Cummings. I want to recognize some of the people who recognized us here in the READ-A-THON and what we are achieving today and what we hope to achieve in the years to come with the CSAD READ-A-THON. Dwight Elliston says, this is a great way to spend my lunch hour. I've learned so much. Sure Realty TV says, thank you for this spoken preservation, such collective pain and triumph. J. Monique C., an alumni from Hamilton College, that is where Edwige went, the executive director of CSAD. She says, what's everyone reading? I'm currently reading Black World by Bertrice Berry. So we thank you very much for all of those comments and your support throughout these 7 hours. Of course, we're gonna try to expand it. Just wait. Thank you so much for joining us, CSAD's inaugural Read-A-Thon. We hope that we'll be 24 hours perhaps next year. We're going to celebrate the conclusion of our program with the children of Colombo School performing for you once again. Take it away. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You guys are great. You're great. Very well done.
This is the inaugural Global Read-A-THON for the Center for Studies on Africa and its Diaspora, coming to you from Georgia State University in Atlanta.